Do I enter? Do I ancestors? Do I? Ancestors, wherever we stand, bless the threshold. Stepping into the new with a faith that's bold. Ancestors, support us for every tomorrow. Give us much joy and comfort us in our sorrows. Cleanse our space, remove the past. Help us find happiness and peace that lasts. Ashe. Welcome to the Sankofa Ancestor Shrine. I'm your host, Sacred Woman Practitioner Tatami, and today we're going to be reading a bit from Meditations Across the King's River by James Weeks. Today the focus is on Mother Earth. I did a little bibliomancy, and the chapter really spoke to me that I opened up to, so I'm excited to share it. Reminder, the prayer we said today and usually is from this free prayer book that you can download the PDF of on ritualready.com. I'll put the link down below. And you can also get the paperback on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. Now, I had thought I was going to read from the book, but I'm going to do that for next week's video. I'm going to get into the storms of transformation on chapter 14 because I'm really going through a lot of transformation. I've had to really detox myself from a lot of the stuff and the habits that I've been doing, like physically, the things I've been consuming, and it's been like really rough physically. So making this transformation though, I was able to realize that previously when I had given up these things, it had been because, I had been working towards a specific goal that had something to do with outside of me, and I was advised to do it. Queen said to do it. I was pregnant. It's always been kind of this outside factor thing, and it wasn't until recently that it really clicked in my brain, and I decided just for me, just from the information I had learned and been researching and gathered over all this time, but also in the moment when it really occurred to me, I looked into it. And so it was really refreshing for me to be able to make this transformation be something that's not just, other things influencing me, but really me influencing me and really blossoming from within in a much more organic way than it has previously for myself, which I say is about time, because I'm like really excited for my 30s and I'm almost there, and I'm just like, I want to be able to get to some of that space, that head space that I've been looking to get into for my 30s, so I feel like I can really enjoy it. So, if you have this book, I am on page 104. As you know, I always try to draw in my books, but I only got so far with my watercolor on my sketches, but I do like to, add my beautiful little additives to all my books, because that's just how I, express love to books. I know a lot of people express love to books like they read it like this so that it never cracks and they don't touch it because they don't want the new book smell to go. But for me, I've always loved to just see other people's thoughts and experiences with the book. He starts with a quote: "When you plant a garden, you are planting more than just vegetables, fruits, or flowers. You're creating community." And I think that is a really wonderful thing, because first of all, a garden is kind of a humble thing. It can be as small as your windowsill in your kitchen. It can be a big thing that you have in your backyard. It can be something you keep in a big pot outside of your front door. So there's a lot of different ways that people can make big and small gardens and supplement staples into their lives, but it's a very humble thing that we can all do. It's pretty accessible. I know the EBT place sometimes passes out seeds. They're pretty cheap to buy. And so trying out your green thumb is a way of attending with nature, and then it's kind of a reciprocal thing too, because you will reap reward. And I know for a lot of people it can be difficult when you're trying to connect with nature and you're just out there like, okay, I left an offering and I'm just not comfortable or there yet to feel like I've done something right. And so it's like, it's much more than that. The connection with the land and tilling of the land and growing and providing for yourself and understanding how it works and these little cycles and creating a little ecosystem in your own home is so important too. And it's also community in the sense that food is community, cooking for others, feeding others, creating with others is community. And if you do create a community garden, technically, you know, like the literal sense, that is a bunch of people coming together and bringing what they have and then growing abundance from that and sharing. And that's, you know, that's the community. That's something that this society does severely lack. He writes, it was a sunny, tranquil afternoon in Oakland until the text from Uncle Jerry on St. Croix arrived. "We are in a predicament," he said. Hurricane Maria was rapidly gathering strength in the eastern Caribbean and would soon become one of the most intense hurricanes in history. Uncle was hoping my sister and I could fly home to St. Croix to ride out the storm with Mom. We only had a few hours to decide because airports would be closing in 48 hours. After weighing all options, it became clear neither of us could fly home. Mom would have to go to a hurricane shelter with Sharita, her caregiver from the island of Dominica. Days later, we woke up to the news that Hurricane Maria had shown no mercy. After lashing St. Croix with brutal 175-mile-per-hour winds, Hurricane Maria unleashed even more fury on Puerto Rico. We are still emerging from the rubble. We have years of rebuilding ahead of us. Even now, it's hard to fathom how so much destruction happens all at once. Mind-boggling devastation is how the Prime Minister of Dominica described the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. CNN anchor Don Lemon used one word to describe the humanitarian crisis throughout the Caribbean: apocalyptic. In the span of 2 short weeks, Irma and Maria, 2 of the most powerful hurricanes in recorded history, wrecked the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Dominica, Saint Martin, and Barbuda. It was an unforgiving hurricane season. Hurricane Harvey, the first storm of the 2017, swept into Houston, Texas, bringing a record 40 inches of rain in 4 days, leaving 83 people dead. The death toll in Puerto Rico was more than 3,000. For my people, climate change is not an intellectual debate. The evidence is in the rubble staring back at us. We are on the front lines. There are no leaves on the trees. The earth has been razed, scorched. In island after island, there is no electricity, no food, no water, no medicine, and little hope. In Frederickstead, St. Croix, the town where I'm from, not a single electric pole was left standing. This I thought was so poignant, and I do actually want to add to his list Hurricane Katrina, because I do think there are examples of climate change and our people being on the front lines here in America, you know. Then also we have, you know, the California wildfires are something that is directly impacting people. We have the lack of water in certain places, lack of clean water in some places. That's also the climate change crisis. We have the fact that they build the highways right through our towns. There's a lot of environmental racism going on. And so I felt that that was just such an important thing to recalibrate ourselves in our movements, because as sacred women, as Hoodoo women, root women, who are working, you know, through all of this, we have to be able to find our way where we are hoodoos who understand the magic portion, but we also understand the physical work, and then we also understand how putting our energy into that physical work does circle back to the magic portion of it. And climate change is something that I do think should be on our mind and should be something that we are advocating for, that we are working with, that we're working with nature, that we're listening with nature, and that we're also finding ways to reconnect. If we do create our own gardens, that is less produce that we will be buying that has been shipped, and that is a way that we can, you know, live in a more healthful way, right, too, because they do have pesticides and such being sprayed on things. In fact, I've recently, when I was listening to information on drinking and alcohol, I learned that a wine is allowed to have pesticides sprayed on it. They will just mash up that grape, and just most wines, unless you buy like specific organic ones, which are more expensive, people are out here straight up taking juiced pesticides to the core. And I mean, I don't drink wine, but I mean, that's a huge thing that a lot of women drink. And I'm frankly, I was just stunned to think about it, you know, to think about people just ingesting these things on a regular basis. But there's no, you know, there's not as much, you know, regulation for these types of things. It's just, people just don't care, and people will be out here absolutely hurting themselves by just ingesting products, you know, on the shelf, as you well know. I'm sure, you know, Queen does say that in the book. But it's just really mind-boggling. So this climate change issue is really personal for us, because we are in places where the hurricanes are going to hit. We are in places where these environmental disasters will leave us often abandoned. And, you know, these slow actions from other places, including our country, is absolutely impacting brown people worldwide, which is why we need to raise our voices about it, and also work our magic about this, and connect with the right people, learn, pass on this information. Climate change is the human rights struggle of our day, says Elizabeth Yempire, an internationally known environmental activist and attorney of Puerto Rican and African descent. Our communities continue to get hit time and time again by climate catastrophe. We can't afford to choose between a Black Lives Matter protest and a climate justice forum, because our survival depends on both of them. Exactly. This civilization, Western civilization, is actually the destruction of our entire planet. It's the destruction of Asashaya, Mother Earth. It is the destruction of humanity. It is leading directly to our extinction, and it leads already directly to massive amounts of death and suffering and harm that a lot of communities didn't actually experience in those huge of droves. Like, I mean, there are certain things that have been able to be helped, but it's at what cost? It's on the cost of often using Black women's bodies for medical research. It's been used on mass genocidal techniques that, you know, even Nazis as well did it to Jewish people. It's been built on this crazy, demented framework that it's all connected, and it's all leading to destruction, and one cannot be ignored for the other. You know, a lot of my life I spent being very Pan-African, but once you look at the environment, you realize, like, no, this conversation has to be global, not because other people need to be invited into my culture or anything, but because we need to learn to work together. And some people's cultures are really out of hand and destructive in the way their societies are built up as well. So these are the types of things that, as sacred women, you know, we do need to focus on, because the planet is important. We can preach all day about people need to eat this and that and wag our finger like, what are you eating? Do you have spirulina? Have you been, you know, drinking your teas or whatever? But if people don't have access to these things, if these things are not available, if the ones that are on the shelves are not safe, these types of things, these are things we also will need to know. It's not enough to just lecture people. It's also about where can they source these things? How can they get their hands on fresh vegetables, on these fresh, you know, things, these healing plants, this information, etc. I've only learned of Elizabeth's work recently, but she's been at the forefront of environmental causes for decades. Born and raised in New York City, Jean-Pierre is the co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance and serves as executive director of UpRose, Brooklyn's oldest Latinx community-based organization. She's challenging all of us to get involved and to fight back. If Black Lives Matter, so must climate change, she insists, right? It's affecting us. We have to lead because the demographics look like us. As people of African and indigenous ancestry, we come from societies that protect Mother Earth, yes ma'am, and our religions, it's our culture, it's the way we very much lived our lives. We come from that, it's in our bloodline, and we need to remember it and draw back on it. Sankofa, go back and get it. Now is the time to reconnect with these old ways. The knowledge is there. It's in our historical memory, yes. So her words take me back to my childhood on St. Croix. Dad was the first environmental activist I knew. So this I felt like was so powerful because it's not even just about being an environmental activist. It's about leading by example. You don't know who is watching. It could be your kids. It probably is your kids. If you have kids or a child around you, it's probably them. But there's others. There's people who, when you make choices, you stand up, you speak your truth out loud, you let other people know what you're doing, what you're going through, what your journey is. When you're honest about things, you inspire other people. And so this is one of those things where, and sometimes you inspire them and they didn't even realize it until years later, and they're thinking back and they're like, you know who I first saw doing this? My father, my mom's friend, when I went to this event, I saw this person and they did this. That's exactly what they were doing. And now I've made those connections. I understand it better. So that's part of also about being a sacred woman, is this living by example, of trying to be that person you want to be and put into action those things that you want to do, because when you have it in action and other people are witnessing it, then they're able to do it and or even be inspired for it, or you just plant the seed for later. So he says his father's first love was flowers, plants, and trees. It was a lifelong passion that began when he studied agriculture at the age of 17. Our home was a lush oasis of towering coconut, mango, avocado, almond, and orange trees, and rare plants that Dad collected from all over the island. Visitors marveled at the botanical heaven I was blessed to live in. When Mom whisked us kids off with her to church every Sunday, Dad usually sat at home on the patio with a cup of tea and newspaper, occasionally looking up to admire the plants that gave him so much joy. It sounds like he was also having a spiritual experience connecting with the Sashaya there. If the earth is out of balance, we are out of balance. If the earth is in danger, we are in danger. If the earth is exploited, we are being exploited. Everything that happens to the earth also happens to us. Ashe. We need it. We need this beautiful living planet that sustains us, that helps us grow, that helps us connect and continue to evolve. For many years, I assumed Dad wasn't a spiritual man because he rarely spoke of God. I was wrong. Dad's spirituality was evident in his intimacy with the earth, and in the many essays he wrote about it that were published in local papers. So again, the relationship with spirit was the evidence, right? It was in the actions that he did. It was what he put his time and energy and ashe into that really showed. I recently found one of his essays tucked away in a drawer in my bedroom. It was entitled Return to the Native. Reading it fills me with pride and gives me a deeper appreciation of who Dad was and what he valued. It must have been written decades ago, but even then, Dad was voicing concerns about global warming long before it was popular to do so. We can make a difference, he said, by planting more trees. What touches me the most in this essay is not just his love for nature, but his desire for all of us to experience this connection too. And so I think that also is a reminder that who we are does leave a legacy with our children, with our family, with our friends, and with others and beyond. You know, who knows who else published into, or who else got a copy of that newspaper and took that clipping and has it around their house for their family to read. So there is a real ability for us to remember that each of those little things that we do and put our time into really do leave a legacy for others to follow in the footsteps of later. Whether we have kids or not, whether, you know, we realize it or not, or whether we're doing things that we think others notice or not. This next part I thought was a really wonderful quote from his father. We must remember not to treat the soil like dirt. It is a command from all the plants of the earth. We must understand our plants and what they have to offer. We all have a responsibility to be stewards of the earth, and it seems to me that stewardship begins in our own backyard. It is my hope that we can help farmers and gardeners come back to their plant community, our common roots, in their common plant sense, to think and plant locally. So I think that his first sentence there, remember not to treat the soil like dirt. You know, don't treat it without reverence. Don't treat it without respect. Remember that the soil is living, that it's magic. That's one of those things that, you know, often people go to sacred places. They'll take some of the dirt, right? They go to cemeteries. They've gone to plantations. They've gone to places of famed abolitionists, artists, people who have, you know, certain energy, certain ashe. People have gone and they use the earth. So remember that the earth holds energy, the earth holds this magic. And then also that it's like, it's a reminder that you don't have to buy things all the time because the earth is free. It's right there. It's outside right now. You can go anytime. You know, I encourage you to go out and just hold the earth in your hands near where you are for your city. Meditate with your city. We talked of this, or your home, or wherever, and hold the dirt around you and really speak wellness and know that you don't have to even buy a candle. You don't have to buy all these other things. If all you can afford is the earth, you know, put a little earth in a bowl and pray with it and have that on your altar. Use mud for different things. There's so many different ways you can incorporate dirt and mud and make paints and all of these other things, you know. So remember that the earth is around you, and speaking with the earth and asking and giving back an offering and taking, that stuff that's free. You know, you don't even have to purchase anything for it. In addition to Dad, I'm also inspired by the respect other indigenous cultures have for the earth. Yoruba scholar Wande Abimbola says it's time to revisit an ancient covenant that was made between humanity and nature. To the ancient African mind, animals, plants, and humans were part of one large family. When plants, animals, and birds arrived on Earth, a covenant was made which stipulated that no species should greedily exploit the other. In the face of the excessive greed, capitalism, and exploitation of the earth, the forests, the oceans, and other creatures of nature, we should ask ourselves, isn't it time we made a new covenant? And that, I think, is important because pretty much all of the cultures that did have this covenant have been overpowered, and now what we're left with is this like superior Western civilization, which is leading directly towards our downfall as a society, as a species. And so, you know, there is a need for this new covenant, and to remind ourselves that, you know, evolving is good and no one person's way is the ultimate, the grandest, the best. Okay, so he says, Professor Abimbola is right. We must revisit the covenant. Climate change is a global phenomenon, already swallowing islands, glaciers, ice caps, and generating more heat waves and floods of unprecedented intensity, said Jacques Leslie, a contributing writer to the LA Times. Climate change comes with many issues, gentrification being one of them. Yarimar Bonilla, an outspoken anthropologist from Puerto Rico who has been in the news a lot lately, said, I really fear there's going to be a mass exodus from Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans are going to leave, and FEMA workers brought in from the U.S. are going to arrive. More wealthy investors are going to come in, and Puerto Rico is no longer going to belong to Puerto Ricans. It will look more and more like Hawaii. So this thing that she's talking about is really huge, because we often, when we think of gentrification, we think of it on these tinier levels of just like our block, our cities, those places that are vibrant in New York or Oakland that are being overrun, or Portland, that are being run over by people who, they have their own different way of doing it, and it really ostracizes everybody who was originally there, who originally made it vibrant and attracted all these people with their culture in the first place. But really, it can be at a large scale, such as entire islands, which has happened often. If you live in a tropical, nice place, hello, the white people are like, we want to make this our vacation spot. Let some rich people like own up all of this, and then they can rent it to us for however X amount a month, so people can vacation here. That's very real. And so this is climate change issue. It's like she said, it's connected to the indigenous, the black liberation struggle, because it's involving us being displaced. And how many times should the indigenous people be the ones who are displaced, losing their homes, and all out? And who's the one doing all of this? Who's the one in control doing all of this stuff that leads to climate change? But yet and still they still get the cream of the crop. So these are the things also that we are having to focus on. So ask yourself, how many trees have I planted this year? How many plants have I nurtured? How many seeds have I sown? How many local farmers have I supported? So this one I thought was really wonderful. I've been watching this YouTube channel lately that has a man who, he's just traveling around and he's looking at the plants, and he plants his own plants like under the overpasses and around here in the Bay Area. And I was like, wow, that's so inspiring. Like, plant seeds, literally have seeds and put them in the earth, and then come back and nurture them later, and have some kind of walk where you visit these plants, where you take care of these plants and nurture them and help them get steady and rooted and grow in your own neighborhood. And look up which ones are the native plants. You're not bringing in an invasive species, you're bringing in a species that works within your environment. And that's also a way you're going to be learning about your environment. You're going to be learning about the land. So I think that reminder of how many trees have you planted, how many plants have you nurtured, how many, it's not just about like looking outside and being like, I see you, tree, but it's also about actively doing something in your neighborhood, going somewhere, maybe just on your own block or in your local park or somewhere, and finding somewhere to plant something and allow it to grow. And obviously some places it's not going to be allowed to grow more than others. Maybe you want to try a more abandoned spot, more hardy plants than others. But finding those things that you can grow, growing your own garden at home, or growing outside, planting a tree outside, finding somewhere to add back is so important. So he says that she has a point about home foreclosures being on the rise in Puerto Rico and wealthy folks buying them up. Investors snap up the properties in the U.S. Virgin Islands too. In Barbuda, an island 39 miles from Antigua, a communal land ownership law that was enacted to protect black people after slavery back in 1834 is now being threatened by wealthy developers. So they're just voracious, greedy. That's capitalism. That's Western culture. That's Western society. As we struggle to rebuild, we must take care of ourselves spiritually, emotionally, and physically. After the passage of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, my sister friends back home encouraged me to look at the storms in a spiritual way. Sengoyomi, also known as Shanray Matthew, a Yoruba priestess, admitted she cried when she saw the condition of her favorite beach after Hurricane Maria. But she also said the energy of hurricanes can be very transforming. So the thought I wanted to do from that page just before I go that I wrote here was that venerating nature is also caring for nature, is active. And it's also not necessarily always like the worst thing or nothing that we can work with, as, they were just saying, it's transformative. You're moving into the unknown every 6 months. You can move with it or you can move against it, Sengyomi tells me philosophically. Moving against it is your unwillingness to surrender, still trying to hold on to everything you've built. You have to be able to step out and say, you know what? I'm adequate to deal with whatever comes. I have the energy. I have the resources to weather the storm. Ocean Tokun, also known as Iria, another Yoruba priestess from St. Croix, said, we can choose to see this crisis as an opportunity. Those of us who have been spared have a responsibility. We have to restore balance and harmony with the earth. We need to wake up. If this is what it takes for us to look up and see the sky, then so be it. Yes, take away the Wi-Fi, take away the TV. We have to plant more. We have to connect more. Times like these force us to realize how fragile we are and how we are at the total mercy of the wind, the earth, and the sea. Ashe. So I agree that we definitely need to take the time to step away from always just watching others, just, taking in content, be it reading, watching videos, etc. That is good, but only to a certain extent, until we start acting, until we start doing the work, until we start finding a way. So I encourage everybody to find a way to connect with the earth and get that ready. See something around you that really facilitates it. Maybe you're going to be going outside for this. Maybe you're going to be inside for it. But whatever you do, and maybe the plant is like useless, but it's just you creating something green, you creating a green life. Like I got this weed from my brother-in-law's house because I was like, dude, I can't seem to keep anything alive. Maybe I could do something with this weed. And I put it in a pot and I tried to make it grow, and it started to die on me, it seemed. But I put a decent amount of roots in there. And sure enough, after about a week and a half, I started to see a little green something coming up from one of the ones that had seemed dead. And now there's 3 of them. There's one that's pretty big. It's about the size of my finger. And then there's 2 that are really tiny. And so, and it's something. I'm teaching myself, you know what I mean? And I have some other seeds, and it's encouraged me, so I'm going to be planting some other ones. I've been trying to find other pots to be able to use as well. So that's what I really encourage you to do too, is find something tangible to do. Even if it's just going out and about and learning about plants, but really having your hands in the dirt in some way. This summer, I think I just skipped something of the little part in the box. The land has always been the land of the people. Still, people did not consider it their own. They saw it as a spirit, as something they were just borrowing it. Yes. Okay. So the land has always been the land of the people, but and I do think a lot of this is Abrahamic religion based, Christian based. That religion is, set up. You're at the top, and everything else, you're the commander of everything else. Whereas other religions, African traditional, indigenous, tribal, it's typically you're a part of the whole, and you have a duty to be a caretaker in the ways that you can, because everything is a part of the cycle, and your job is to be a part of the cycle and facilitate where you can, and do what you can as well as survive. And I think that disconnect is a huge part of it, but we are trying to step away from that mindset of like man is the best or whatever, and more so focus on the powers that are around us naturally in these elements. This summer I plan to do exactly what Ashon suggests. I'm going to plant more, and I'm going to ask my grandchildren to help. That's some good advice. I have tomatoes, strawberries, and zucchinis on my mind. I'm sure Dad will be pleased to know that his great-grandchildren are following in his footsteps. My father passed in 2008, but many of the trees he planted, which I watered as a child, still live on, providing shade and fruit for another generation, right? You're going to be participating in things that go on long past you. That's already thinking with that ancestral mind of what this legacy you're leaving behind is so much more than when you write a book or, you become a famous singer or something. The legacy of leaving behind trees and knowledge of how to work with nature and help facilitate its growth and well-being, that's also just so powerful, and a legacy that a lot of people forget or underestimate because it's maybe not as glamorous or uplifted by Western media, which has other priorities, mainly buy, sell, capitalism, consume. Pierre Rabhi, a leading ecologist in France, says, "To me, cultivating a garden is a political act. An act of legitimate resistance against the system that takes away all possibilities for citizens to survive on their own." Whoa, that was such a good one. Cultivating a garden is a political act, an act of legitimate resistance against the system that takes away all possibilities for citizens to survive on their own. Absolutely. This society, it's absolutely built on crippling your ability to function on your own, but it's also built on this way that okay, it's like you feel like you don't have the skills to do it this way, but you can barely hold on other ways. The majority of people in the United States are living paycheck to paycheck, so it's not like the alternative is serving people that well. It's not like people are being provided for at this grand length by their by their governments. It's just not happening. So, it's very interesting to me, I think, overall, to really think of, gardening as a political act, reconnecting with nature as a political act, because it is all politics. It is all connected. It is absolutely politics that they are, corporations pay our government so that they don't have to get regulated, so that they don't have to follow the same rules, et cetera, et cetera. And to remind yourself that you are doing something revolutionary, and in the vein of things that you're those same protests that our ancestors have done throughout civil rights before that, and even in this in times when they were enslaved, they were protesting through small acts and large acts of defiance. In addition to planting trees, St. Croix ecologist and tour guide Lassie Davis says conserving water is something we can do to help combat global warming. Gray water recycling is something that I've been learning about recently since I got a dorm washer for myself. And it's something that just never occurred to me before until I just saw the water running out. And it was like, oh my goodness, all those times that I used the washer out there, I've never even had to look at all of the water that gets used in the washer. We have to change our attitude and make a shift in our minds. Everything is connected. We have to chip in together. Nature doesn't need us. We need nature. We have to take care of the earth. We don't have a choice. He says we must study cultures who came before us and learn how they managed their environmental resources and how they dealt with climate catastrophes. I think that's also important because, it's not saying like, oh, the ancestors were brilliant. We need to go back to doing everything they did exactly. The world's not going to go back. But we can take advice from them on how they caretaked for nature, how they sustained themselves, how they were able to find ways that weren't as harmful practices, and perhaps we can implement some of that. And perhaps we can't, there's just, perhaps we can implement it, perhaps we can't. It's just kind of how it is. The earth is offering us a strong message, says John Perkins in his book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This planet, our home, is demanding we see her as a living earth. She's not just a mass of rock and soil spinning around in an indifferent sun. She is a biological member of a living universe. What will we do with that message, you and I? We have the opportunity to dream a new dream, to explore options for exciting alternative ways of living, for turning failure into success, writes Perkins. When audience members ask me what specifically they can do, I start with, you must follow your passions and use your talents in the most efficient, satisfying, and enjoyable way you can. You can start with your individual behavior, recycling, driving less, turning off lights, shopping, and banking locally. We can join nonprofit and other government organizations, consumer movements aimed at boycotting specific corporations. We can run for elected office, participate in demonstrations and marches, write blogs, books or articles, make videos or movies. You must take the path that is most effective for you, the one that offers you the greatest joy. Make it fun, don't burn out. And I think that's a great way to end that whole speech because, it's a reminder also that when we find our passions, when we try to put our energy into things that don't tear us totally down, I think that is one of the more important acts of activism. It's not just all those things, write a book, we make a movie, blah, blah, blah. That's important, and that's really great for those of us who are going to be going down paths like that. But also remembering not to burn yourself out, not to be out there screaming yourself hoarse, making yourself sick, because you do still, self-care is still a part of this. Healing the generational trauma, making sure you're okay and in your center is still absolutely a part of this. So don't burn out. All right, I hope you have found some kind of inspiration or gotten the wheels turning, or you will this week, for a way you can do this and get your hands on a plant of some sort. Maybe try to propagate something. Maybe get a clipping and try and get them roots grown from something that's already grown. I know what most plants can get propagated from, like roses and fruit trees and things like that. Maybe you can try your luck with something like that. I know there's a lot of videos here on YouTube. Maybe you'll plant a seed, start it from a seed. Maybe, I don't know, the possibilities are endless. Maybe you'll make a video or write a book about seeds and planting and gardening and whatnot. The wheels are turning. May your ancestors and spirit guides be with you at every crossroads, and I will see you next time.